Welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast.
Can't even recognize this place. Too many pieces of our past mistakes.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I believe real change starts from the inside out. So let's work together to improve our money and our lives from the inside out. We will explore all things money and our relationship with it. Join me each week with a rotating set of co-hosts, friends, and interviews. Let's jump in.
It's time, we going round and round and round and round.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Maggie.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inside Out Money. This is a personal finance podcast focused on redefining wealth from the inside out. Each week, I speak with a rotating set of co-hosts about a different financial topic to help you improve your financial mindset and tactics. Today, we've got Andrew, Andrew, you are one of the most popular co-hosts, by the way.
Thank you.
I don't say that to everyone. And we're going to discuss whether or not you should pay off your mortgage. We're going to talk through the pros and cons of paying off your mortgage early or completely, and some of the specific considerations that we recommend weighing to make your own personal decision. And then we're going to weave in our own personal mortgage payoff stories.
Yeah, sounds good. This is a topic that typically gets people fired up. Most people kind of fall within one of two camps. Either it's a yes or it's a no, you're crazy.
Yeah, people have very strong beliefs. It's almost like a political belief. Like, are you a Democrat or a Republican, right? Do you believe in paying off your mortgage early or not?
Right.
And, I have had people like straight up look at me like I am stupid for paying off my mortgage early.
Absolutely. I've had that too.
Yeah. Plenty of others who are like, oh, that sounds amazing. And are, wish they could do it. So this is a age-old debate. And we should add, we have both paid ours off.
Correct.
Okay. So, but we're going to share all of the angles and considerations. I don't want you to think we are biased because we've paid ours off, because we'll share some regrets and some things that we perhaps might have done differently.
Yeah. I think both of us would have done things a little bit differently from how they played out.
Yeah. As with many things, if I could predict the financial future, I'd change many things of what I've done over the last 20 years.
But I think the goal today is to talk through the pros and cons, the considerations, things that we both thought about both at the time, and kind of some reasoning about why we did the things we did, and then with 2020 hindsight on some of the things we may have would have changed a little.
Yeah. And then also, when you said 2020 for a second, I thought you meant the year. Could also say with 2023 hindsight, which is we're in the year 2023 right now. There's a lot of interesting things happening with interest rates and in the mortgage and housing industry right now. Which,
it is a very different world.
Yeah, perhaps we'll get into. Okay, so let's jump in with the pros of paying off your mortgage early. And as we do that, Andrew, I'm curious, there's the emotional and psychological side of it, and then there's the financial pros. Which one led your decision to pay off early?
Oh, it was definitely the emotional side of things, of just, I've always had such an aversion to debt that I just didn't want to have a payment. I didn't want to have that kind of hanging over me. And that was what drove it for me.
Yeah, I 100% agree and am in the same camp. So the one of the big pros is the emotional and psychological benefit of what it feels like to have, I'd say less debt, but often the mortgage is the last debt you paid off. So for us, I think it was our last piece of debt. So after we paid off our mortgages, we had no debt. That peace of mind, that feeling that your house is taken care of, and yes, there's some maintenance costs and there's the taxes, which, are not nothing, but it feels really great to be debt free. And that was my motivation personally. I knew the math was questionable. I didn't care.
Yeah. And I think some of my reasoning was I've always believed that personal finance is much more about human behavior than it is about the actual numbers. And we've talked about that I think one of the first episodes we ever did was we talked about that aspect. And I think that concept plays into this, because if you look at this question purely from a math perspective, you would say, no, you shouldn't. And I've had plenty of people tell me, Andrew, do you not understand math here?
Yeah, what was your interest rate? Yeah,
I do. But I've always strongly believed that it's about behaviors when it comes to personal finance. So that's what drove me to my decision. And for me, and we'll get into my story in a little bit, but it was it was me listening to Dave Ramsey, and Dave Ramsey every Friday would do Debt-Free Friday, and he'd have these people calling up screaming they're debt-free, and he was such a huge proponent of paying off the mortgage, and I kind of drank that Kool-Aid and said, hey, I think we can do this. And so that was a big driver to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't have any voices like that in my head at the time, so I couldn't even trace back what was a big driver to me, other than I didn't like debt, like you just said, and I knew it was going to feel, I just like the idea of saying I have no debt and I owe nobody nothing. And no matter what happens, I had just recently gone through a divorce around the time I paid mine off, or within a couple of years. And I was like, man, it feels really good to just have something and fully own it and not, stress about it.
I think it's also a more conservative strategy. And I think it's safer, right? There's a safety aspect to this. It's absolutely more conservative, and the more leverage you have, the riskier your finances become. And while that leverage can help you in terms of driving your overall net worth by potentially investing it in other assets, it's definitely if you have no leverage, it's by definition much safer.
So we led with the emotional and psychological benefits of the pros of why you could or should pay off your mortgage early. There are also financial benefits. So let's talk about those for a minute.
Yeah. So I think the first one is it's when we come back to the math, you get a guaranteed rate of return, right? Yeah. So if you've today, and it's weird, like we're talking about this today when mortgage rates are at 8%, when they were 3, 4, 5, 6, like those are the numbers that we're talking about. But in an environment like today, where else can you get a guaranteed 8% return? There aren't many places. And so if you have a high interest mortgage, you can, every dollar you put against it, a guaranteed return on what that interest rate is.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue, even if you have a 4 or 5% mortgage, I mean, I know a lot of people have like some high 2s and 3s from some recent COVID times, but even if you have 4 or 5, that is a guaranteed 4 to 5%, which you can't get anywhere all the time, right? You longer term can get it. Well, it's not guaranteed though. This is guaranteed. It is a guaranteed amount that you will save. And again, the interest savings over the long term, you've seen all the different, I'm not going to go into the specific numbers because there's so many different stats out there, but if you add an extra couple mortgage payments each year, or you throw an extra $100, you save like hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest over the life of a 30-year mortgage. And so another financial benefit is just, along with that guaranteed rate of return, is you're saving on all of that interest, which again is part of the guaranteed rate of return.
Yeah. And you also have, we've talked about automating savings in past episodes, and paying off or making additional payments on your mortgage is a way of automating savings and enforcing savings as well. So you're not thinking about it.
Yeah. I actually think it is potentially it has the emotional and the financial benefit if you are somebody who is not disciplined with your money. If you need to get it out of your hands and into a safe space, maybe you get a windfall or you got an inheritance or something, like get it out of your hands and put it into an appreciating asset. And again, we can sit there and debate the exact, could you make more in the stock market with index funds and other things? Yes, many times, potentially / often, but it is a guaranteed rate of return. And again, if you aren't super disciplined, it's a forced way to bank saving.
Yep. Another one is, in the past, a lot of people itemized their taxes because they had what's called the SALT, state and local income taxes. And recently there was a limit put of $10,000 on your SALT deductions. And so,
Andrew, what's SALT?
State and local income taxes.
Okay. I don't think I've ever heard the word SALT, by the way.
State and local taxes, not income, state and local taxes.
That would be salads.
And because of that limit, people who would live in high state income tax states like California, like New York, they used to itemize because they got a deduction for their state taxes. Because there's that limit now, most people, or a good number of people who used to itemize, now don't. And then if you're just taking the standard deduction, then you don't get to deduct your mortgage interest. And so that used to be a huge benefit. And the SALT issue has become so big that it's the reason why the House is in such a mess right now, is because there are certain congressmen from New York who've basically said to the Republican leadership, you have to change the SALT laws because it's hurting New Yorkers so much. So that people always used to talk about, well, you take out a big mortgage because you can get all these tax deductions on the interest, and that's just no longer the case.
Yeah, that's a good segue from pros into cons, because it used to be a pro, and for many people it no longer is. And it's not that it's a con; it's just either here nor there.
Yeah, I for my own, I used to itemize, and now I don't.
Yeah, same here. Okay, so let's shift to the cons of paying off your mortgage early.
Yeah, so opportunity cost. This is the biggest one. This is the argument that everyone always cites is, well, you could, if you're going to, rather than paying off the mortgage, take that money and invest in the market. Why would you pay off a 5% loan when you can get average return of 8% in the market? And so that's the primary argument around how the math is, hey, put it in the market, you can get a better return.
So in that example of, a 5% interest rate when you could get, on average 8% in the market, you're hoping and assuming you'll get 7 to 8% average return in the market. But what's interesting right now is there's so many people I know that have a high 2, low 3% interest rate on their mortgage, and they can get 5.3% guaranteed. They're not hoping that the market does well, guaranteed in a high yield savings account right now. So there's even more of a, of all the people who argue, is your money better invested elsewhere? I would say, I don't regret my decision in any way to pay off my mortgage. Again, I did it for the psychological, emotional aspects. I feel very good about it. I feel very proud about it. But at the time I paid that off, I had a 3.3% 15-year mortgage. It was 3.375%. And high yield savings account rates weren't that high, but the market was doing okay. If I went back and actually did the math, yes, I would have been better off hanging on to that money, keeping a low rate, making more money in the market. So I guess my point is, we could all look at the math of certain things historically that we can or can't predict and make a statement about what we would or wouldn't have done. But ultimately, this is such a personal decision, and we'll kind of get into that more in a minute. But the math, I would say, often wins if you want to go by the math, right? So you're not wrong if you say, yeah, it doesn't make sense to pay off your mortgage early. That's a personal decision.
Yeah, and it kind of comes down to the environment that you're living in. And so in a world like we have today, where high yield savings accounts are paying over 5%, and you've got people with 3 or 4s, yeah, I wouldn't be paying off it either. Whereas back when you and I were making some of those decisions, it was the other way around. And so I think like most things in personal finance, it depends. And the situation of where things sit in the economy today, you're going to make different decisions.
Yeah, very true.
So the other thing to think about is that your mortgage actually gets cheaper over time. And what I mean by that is you have a fixed payment, but over 30 years, you've got inflation. And so over time, if you hold on to a 30-year mortgage, those 25, when you get to the year 25 and in the later years, that mortgage is going to feel much cheaper because of inflation. And so that's an argument against paying it off.
Yeah. And, the other con, if you will, is, you are less liquid, right? So there's the illiquidity of paying off your mortgage. You have a lot of your funds tied up in your home's equity. But I would also argue it's not forever, right? It's not undoable. So, I
think this one is one that I regret a little bit, because when we did pay ours off, we had a very high concentration of our overall net worth in the home. And so yeah. I think this is a good point, and it would have been better for us to have it split a little bit. One thing you can do is you can always take out a home equity line and just not use it, or you can, obviously you can always sell your house. There's high transaction costs, and you can't do it overnight type thing if you really need money quickly. But this is definitely a valid argument that I think people who are on the camp of no way I'm paying off my mortgage, I think this is a very valid point.
Yeah, we had a situation where we were buying rental properties and mortgaging them. And and when you're doing a second home, you don't qualify for as good of a rate, right, on an investment property. So I was looking back, kicking myself, being like, oh, I had a 3.375 rate locked in. And if I saved that cash for the future, I would have had it more. Now, it still wouldn't have been fully liquid because I probably would have had it in the market or somewhere else. But I would have been able to maintain that lower rate on my primary home and then been able to cash flow more rentals, if that makes sense. And so that, again, in hindsight, if I could, I still look back and I feel good about my decision, but it did make me less flexible. And so that is definitely something you want to consider, which I think is, the end answer to should you pay off your mortgage or not is it depends. And it depends on a lot of things for you personally and your own individual financial goals and circumstances and other factors like what interest rates are in the time period of time you're making this decision in, what other debts you have, what other investment opportunities. So I think when I paid mine off, I had no vision or expectation of ever purchasing a rental property. It was before that. And so I couldn't see out in the future that far to know that that would be a future need. But again, if I was, taking my current self and going back and remaking that decision, I think I would have made that decision a bit differently. Again, still no regrets, like when I step back and have perspective of how far I've come. But ultimately, there is no perfect answer for anybody. It really depends on all of the financial things we just talked about and the psychological, emotional aspect for you personally. So if it sounds like something that's going to feel so good and freeing to you personally, you might be in the camp that wants to pay off your mortgage early.
So maybe let's talk through the tactics of, because there are actually a couple different ways that you can do it. And some people, if you look at, most people get paid every other week. And so there are 26 payment periods typically. And so one strategy is to make one extra payment a year. And so that month where you get an extra paycheck, put it against the mortgage, and that can reduce the term. And also most loans will let you apply it to that extra payment to the principal, or it's I'm just making payments early, and you want to make sure you're checking the box that says, hey, I want this applied to the principal, and not just prepaying your mortgage.
Yeah, totally agree. What was your strategy, Andrew?
My strategy was we would add additional principal payments every month. And I would just set that at the threshold where I knew what our free cash flow was for the month. And we would just continually increase that as our income increased. And so that was the approach. I made a couple one-time, lump sum payments against it. But typically my strategy and approach was, when I'm setting up the automated mortgage payments, check the box that says apply additional principal payments, set it to whatever I wanted, like $400, $500, and then revisit that every once in a while to see if I wanted to increase it.
I did a similar thing where, it was a hybrid strategy, but mine was, I'd say, a little bit more, what's the word? Not organized, just kind of frantic. Well, first off, I switched to a 15-year mortgage at one point. And so that forced me to have a much higher payment. So much more was going towards principal. And we can, give some math examples of what that looks like in the future of switching from a 30-year to a 15 mortgage. Sorry, from a 30-year mortgage to a 15-year mortgage. Again, you could save hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest payments over the course of your mortgage by doing that, depending on the value of the house you're buying. But so I switched to that at one point, and that forced a much higher payment. I also, when I would get some bonuses at work, I would throw big chunks against it. And that felt good. Again, back to that other point of I got the money out of my hands, and I wasn't tempted to go do something crazy with it, like buy a bigger house or throw a pool in my backyard or buy a new car or whatever it might be. I immediately kind of got it out of my hands, and it felt good. It felt like I was, putting it to work, if you will. Now, at the time, I wasn't as knowledgeable and comfortable investing in index funds and in the stock market. So again, if I could go back, I would do more of a mix, and I would put maybe some of it against my mortgage and more of it into index funds. But again, I wasn't doing that. And so what I did know to do was pay off all my debt. And that's what I was laser focused on. Okay, so just to recap that, you can make biweekly payments, like Andrew mentioned, get an extra payment in every year. You can make additional amounts towards the principal payment, which you can do whenever you want on a regular basis. A lot of them have a setting where you can automate it, or you can just do it ad hoc whenever you want, or you can actually refinance like I did.
And most loans, most states have laws that don't have a prepayment penalty on loans. So that makes refinancing easy in a market that's moving in the right direction with interest rates going down. That's helpful. You did it. I've done it multiple times.
Yeah. And obviously you want to you don't want to like constantly be refinancing because there is a transaction cost that
Yep.
you're repaying closing costs, and not as high as when you're initially purchasing a house sometimes, but it's, you've got to have the cash to pay those closing costs. Or I don't know if you could still like roll them back into the mortgage.
Yeah, that's most offer the no closing cost option. You pay a higher rate, but you do it with no closing cost. Most finance companies will offer that.
So we kind of weaved in some of the details about our own mortgages and payoffs. And I think I, dropped in a few regrets I might have if I could have predicted the future. Andrew did too. But I think it's helpful to hear specific people's stories, or I hope it's helpful for you all to hear specific people's stories. So since Andrew and I are the ones here, we'll share ours. Andrew, why don't you start and share a little bit of your mortgage payoff story and just your housing costs and all that?
We bought our first house in Vermont. Technically, I bought it. I was the only one on the mortgage. Crystal and I were together at the time, but I bought the house, and it was a townhouse. And when I was thinking about it and talking to my parents told me that one of their biggest regrets was having a 30-year mortgage, and they strongly encouraged me to get a 15-year mortgage. And the thinking on that was, one, yes, the payment is going to be higher, but it's going to force you into a lower cost house.
I love that rule just for that reason.
Yes.
Not, it's like the opposite thinking of you. Originally, you could position it around, oh, you'll pay it off faster, you'll pay less in interest. But the fact that it minimizes your housing, which again is one of people's most expensive pieces of their expenses, it's one of the biggest, most expensive categories. You're avoiding the fact that you could like become house poor, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I love that.
Exactly. And I think my parents were house poor for quite a bit, and I think that's something they wanted me to avoid in that. And so we got a 15-year mortgage, and it was $150,000 at a rate of 5.25%. So that was 2002. And then I actually refinanced when rates dropped. But what a lot of people do when they refinance is they reset the clock. And what I mean by that is they refinance, but they take out the same term loan that they had. And so, and this is pretty rare for people they offer 10-year notes, but the mortgage broker I was working with had a 10-year option, and I decided to do a 10-year on the refinance. And it was a slightly higher payment, but I had just recently paid off my car. And so I basically rolled the previous car payment that I had into the mortgage. And so it felt like it wasn't that, my lifestyle didn't change, because I was paying, I think it was $350 a month for the car. And I turned around and then added that to the mortgage.
Yeah, it's great if you can time something like that where you don't even notice the difference, really.
Yeah. And so that was in Vermont, and we bought, the market did really well during this time period. And then in 2000 we sold in 2005. And we'd seen good appreciation. We'd seen almost $100,000 of appreciation in a pretty short period of time.
That's in 3 years. That's awesome.
That sounds great. But the problem is that when you sell at the top of the market and then you move, you're buying at the top of the market as well. Right. And
you were moving to a higher cost of living market, right?
I'd say no. Actually, Atlanta versus Vermont was actually lower.
Okay.
So they're probably comparable. It depends on where you are in Atlanta. Burlington, Vermont was a pretty small place. So, if you're in Buckhead in Atlanta versus being in the suburbs, very different, right?
But the point is, you moved to Atlanta, you met Maggie, you started working together.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, and you bought a house.
So we definitely we had a good amount of home equity from our house in Vermont, but we made a really good decision. And although the mortgage broker and the realtors were saying you could afford a much, much larger house because I had the home equity, we'd increased our income as well. We kept it moderate, and we bought a $400,000 house, and we took out a $200,000 mortgage, whereas we probably could have doubled that number easily,
Yeah.
been approved for double that amount. And the $200,000 mortgage was at 6.25%. So rates were higher. Our monthly payment was about $2,200. And so,
And that was for a 15-year mortgage.
yes.
Because at this point, you're sold. Your parents have given you this advice. You've followed it.
Yeah. So although I had 10 years just wasn't very common. So we went back to the 15-year $200,000 at 6.25%. So then we started definitely as our incomes increased. Crystal had gotten her master's degree. She was a teacher, so that helps increase her income. And then I'd gotten a new job at Home Depot, sitting next to Maggie, and that had increased our income. And I think the key thing throughout all of this was we didn't change our lifestyle at all. We continued, basically, as our income increased, all that extra income we plowed into the mortgage, and that was key. Like we've talked about a lot on this show before, is maintaining lifestyle and keeping lifestyle inflation in check is huge, and that's what enabled a lot of this. And then we did refinance down to we did a no cost refinance in 2007, and
No cost to you.
no cost to me, right? Yeah, the rate was we dropped it from like 6.25% to 5.5%.
I shouldn't even say no cost to you, because there's a cost. You didn't pay out cash at the closing. It was no cost at closing.
The mortgage broker paid the closing costs, and so that was in 2007. That dropped our payment by a couple $100 a month, and we just continued to put additional payments onto the principal. And then in 2009, November 10th, 2009, we paid it off.
That's awesome. So Andrew, though, that house, that $400,000 house, that's not the house you're in now, right?
Correct. So when we lived in that house for a number of years, almost 10 years after we paid it off. And then when we moved to our current house, we took out a small mortgage to eliminate the need to sell the old house first before buying this one. And then we paid it off after we sold the other house.
Okay, very nice. You have perhaps a better memory of all of the details of your house purchases. I'll do mine, I think, quickly. I bought a house with my ex-husband a couple years out of college. I was house poor for sure in both houses. That was back when we only had to put 5% down, which is crazy. They don't even really allow that much anymore, do they? Post housing crisis 2008.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. So it's a lot hard. It was very easy to get a loan back then, putting 5% down. I cannot remember the cost of that house. Honestly, I was going to go look it up, but I'll give more details about the house I'm in now. And lived in that house for, I want to say 5 to 7 years. Again, I have a terrible memory. Then in 2008, I purchased the house that I live in now, which I still live in that house. And that house, I remember we bought for $415,000. We really could not afford it. We had a 30-year 5.625% interest rate. And I do just remember being we put 10% down on it. I remember that. We put about $40,000 down, maybe 45. And I remember feeling very house poor. I remember thinking, oh, I hope we continue to make more and more money because we can barely afford this payment. And we really wanted to get into this neighborhood. And that was one of the cheapest houses. Yeah, it was a neighborhood I grew up in. I was very nostalgic for it. I knew it would appreciate. I wanted to be in this school district. We were a mile down the road, but just in not as good of a school district. And just not as much of a neighborhood feel, where it was just a couple small streets off of a busier street.
And you wanted your kids to go to the same elementary school.
Yeah, I had a lot of nostalgia for this. It was literally a half a mile around the corner from where my mom still lived and the house I grew up in. So we really pushed to buy this house. And again, 5.625% 30-year mortgage. And at some point we moved to a 15-year mortgage. And and this was when I was with my ex-husband. And I remember that was a big deal for us. Because it was a good decision we were making, and we were getting a much better rate. And so we were able to get down into the 4s. I don't remember the exact rate. I was having trouble finding some of the documentation on it. And then I refied again after I got divorced. And at that point, I was so hung up on the timing, I refied to a 14-year mortgage. You were able to just pick a number, I think.
Interesting.
And I was a year into the 15-year. And I was like, well, I don't want to, because when you keep refining, you're like restarting the clock. So and that's one thing to note, like when you do refi from even a 15-year to another 15-year, if you do it 3 years later, you just added 3 more years on. And so I was very focused on that. And I refied post-divorce because it was going to become my own, payment at that point, to a 14-year mortgage at 3.375%. So the final chunk of money I paid off.
That's low.
It was low. And again, we'll get into some, regrets in a minute. And I remember the payment was $3,200 a month.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I didn't say is we were paying, when we had that first mortgage at $415,000, we were paying PMI for a very long time, which is private mortgage insurance, which basically means they shouldn't have given you that much money. And so you're having to pay an extra level of insurance to ensure that you actually can afford to pay off that loan because you didn't put enough down. So if you I don't remember, I think if you put down like under 20%, you had to pay PMI at the time.
Yeah, it was somewhere 10 to 20.
Yeah. And then you have to apply to get the PMI removed. It doesn't just like automatically go away a lot of the times. And so I remember being very excited because it was like over 100, almost like $150 or $200 in PMI insurance we would pay every month. We also did a $200,000 remodel around 2010. When we bought this house, it was very old. It was like an original ranch style house. Everything was old. The electrical system, the sewer system, the plumbing, the kitchen cabinets were original and again, 60, 70 years old. And I decided to do this big remodel. It was actually after my dad died and it was kind of related to him dying. Like I kind of had this like life is short moment. I don't want to wait until I fully have the money to like be in a more comfortable house that would work better for our needs. And so we decided to do a $200,000 remodel and I put in $100,000 cash that I had saved up. Because again, I didn't put money in the stock market back then, so I was sitting on a lot of cash. And I borrowed $100,000 from my mom, which was an interest-free loan. Again, that is a huge privilege to be able to do something like that. And so I was really, though it was a $415,000 house, I essentially paid off a $615,000 mortgage between the $200,000 remodel and the $415,000 mortgage. And then all the interest I paid, which who knows what that was. But it wasn't as much because I paid off that mortgage in March 2018 when I was 37 years old, and it felt amazing. I was recently divorced, recently-ish within the last, I think, couple years around then. Oh no, in 2018, I would have been divorced it was like 5 years divorce, so 5 years after I got divorced. But on my own, I paid it off. And it was just like a big thing to me that I paid that off as a single divorced mom. And I was throwing full bonuses at it. I'll get into some regrets of some other things I did to pay it off, but it felt really, really good.
Yeah, it's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, thank you. On that note, let's shift to what we might have done differently. Like, what would you have done differently, Andrew?
So we were, like you, laser focused on paying off the mortgage. We were still doing things like contributing to our 401ks at work, and we'd done some Roth contributions, but I didn't start investing in a brokerage account at Vanguard until 2012, which was 3 years after we paid off the mortgage. And so if I think back to the years that we were paying off the mortgage, I think it would have served us better if we would taken a more balanced approach and putting 50 cents against the mortgage and 50 cents into VTSAX would have been a better strategy. It would have taken us longer to pay off, but ultimately I think, like many things, I think in life, like a balanced approach is good. And we were absolutely 100% focused on it. And we worked really hard at it, and we had a goal and we knocked it out. But I think it would have been better also from a risk perspective. We had a really high concentration of our net worth in just the house, and it absolutely mathematically, it would have worked out. It's interesting, like when you look at the math and just the overall timing, I never like to time the market, but during when we were really making some big payments against the house was when the market crashed in 2008. So my psychology was, heck, the market is tanked. I'm just going to keep plowing money into the mortgage because it's a nice, safe investment. I don't need to worry about what the market's going to do. Also, even on the run up from 2005 to 2008, we were also making payments against the mortgage. And so we weren't essentially buying equities when they were really overvalued. But at the same time, and this is where stock picking is hard, you gotta pick both ends, right? You gotta get the top right and you gotta get the bottom right. We would have been much better served had we been investing in 2008 and 2009 after the market had crashed. And all through that time period, all the way up until 2012, until we actually actually started. That 3-year period is when we would have saw some great growth in BTSAX. So I think just overall a more balanced approach. I think the key here is, yes, paying off the mortgage. I wholeheartedly agree with it. I recommend people do it, but don't do it at the expense of investing in the market as well. You want to do both. And if it takes you just a longer period of time, that's okay. And it's just a more balanced approach is my recommendation now.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it's hard to say it's a regret in any way because it's still something we're very proud of and that we did and we feel good about. But yeah, could we go back and predict everything financially, we would have done some things differently. It's funny, usually when you're listing your regrets, Andrew, I tend to start adding more. I'm like, oh, actually, yep, you're right. I didn't max out my 401k. All those years I was sucking. Yeah. I maxed out the company match. I did not max out the total legal amount allowed by the IRS. And that would have, reduced my taxes, my tax liability. It would have put more money, growing for longer. So I definitely, do regret that I didn't have a more balanced approach, like you said. And then I also did something extra bad. I sold about $100,000 of Home Depot stock. It was like all the stock I had from when I worked there that I had bought on employee stock purchase program in very small amounts, like per paycheck. It was a major pain in the butt to calculate capital gains on. As a result of the fact that it was through the course of 26 paychecks throughout the year over 5 years and in like $20 increments, seriously. And so I sold it, paid long-term gains on it. And I kind of also was like, I shouldn't really own like a bunch of individual stock. But at the same time, if I went back and looked, like that Home Depot stock continued to do very, very well over the following decade and heavily outperformed my 3.375% mortgage interest that I paid off. So again, hindsight's 2020. I also wish I had gone back and bought some, Facebook and Adobe and Google and Tesla stock, but I cannot predict these things. And again, I still feel very good about my decision overall in the grand scheme of things. And, we are super privileged to even be in a position to be able to do this. So when we talk about our regrets, it's more to help other people and less to, it's not like we're like complaining and we feel so like, oh, woe is us that we don't have another amount of money in the bank as a result of a slightly better decision. So
one thing I also would have done slightly differently, I think, is I'm a huge proponent of the 15-year mortgage because of the forced housing. It forces you to buy a smaller house. More affordable house. But I think I would have got a 30-year, but paid it off on a 15-year schedule. And so, you don't know what the future is going to look like, right? You could have a job loss, right? A health issue, right? Something like that. And just having the flexibility to back off that extra payment, I think is pretty useful. And so someone said that to me a long time ago. I was like, oh, that actually makes pretty good sense. Now you have to have the discipline in order to follow through with it. But going into it with saying, okay, I'm going to calculate my mortgage based off of 15, and this is how I'm going to determine how much house I can afford, I think is a great approach.
Well, yeah, I agree, but I would just say with one caveat. At various times, there is a much lower rate you can get on a 15-year mortgage. And so when the rate differential is enough, it might be worth it. But oftentimes it has been pretty darn close. And when it's pretty darn close, it doesn't really hurt you to just go higher and then pay it off faster.
Yeah, I remember with the first mortgage we got in Vermont, it was 0.5 point. And that was significant, whereas more recently, it's been either maybe 0.1 of a point or even flat, right? Almost no difference.
Yeah, I was going to look up what it is right now as an example. This is on CNET, today's mortgage rates as of October 24, 2023. A 30-year is at 7.98% and a 15-year is at 7.19%. So at that point, you're like already in the sevens, it's certainly at that high of a rate like that, that's close to a whole percentage point. But if you are going to aggressively pay it off, you may be less concerned and you should run the exact math. So we'll put a link in the show notes to Andrew. I know one of your favorite mortgage interest calculators.
Yep, Dr. Calculator. It's a great one. I spent a lot of time in that over 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's fun to play around with. But remember, your mortgage broker is not necessarily going to give you all of this perspective because they're not
incentivized. Your mortgage broker is not your friend when trying to determine affordability, as they are paid a commission based off of the size of your loan.
They want to loan you as much money as possible.
Absolutely.
At as high of a rate as possible too, I'd say. Okay, so I think we can pretty quickly, let's wrap this up with just some things that helped us. We've talked about, but I think it's worth double clicking on real quick?
Yeah, so you can't pay off your mortgage if you don't have the free cash flow or make additional payments on the mortgage. So it all starts with expenses and lifestyle. We can go listen to some of the previous episodes, but you've got to have free cash flow in order to start attacking it.
Yeah. So to say it another way, we both were living below our means. We were minimizing lifestyle inflation. So I mentioned when I bought that $415,000 house, I could barely afford it. Well, pretty quickly in the next few years, we could much better afford it. And then we could afford way more than that 5 years later, but we didn't. Right. And 10 years later, I could afford a lot more than that. And I never bought more.
Yeah. And I think previous, go back 20, 30 years, I think a lot of people said, a lot of the recommendations was take out the biggest mortgage you can afford because you'll get leverage and you just end up being house poor, right? And so Ramit talks about this quite a bit in his book, but you got to make sure that you're being smart when it comes to affordability and how much you're taking on. Yeah, I like using the rule of thumb of no more than 3 times your gross income. Gross household is the size of the mortgage you can take out.
Yeah. So in addition to minimizing lifestyle inflation and having that additional cash flow, as our income did increase, we put that extra money towards the mortgage, not towards continuing to inflate our lifestyle or buy more stuff and all that. And that really, really helped us. And I think, Andrew, you used the word, really focused. You were super focused on paying your mortgage off. I was too. I'd almost say I was like obsessed.
Same.
About it at times. It was a laser focus to the point of an obsession. But look, there's way worse things you could be obsessed with. Like being obsessed with paying off debt. If that's your vice, like go for it. You do you.
Right.
Well, I hope this is helpful to all of you that have been in some way in the great mortgage debate of do you pay it off or do you put your money elsewhere and invest? I can tell you the debate is, do you pay it off or do you invest? It's not, do you pay it off or do you go blow your money on other stuff, right?
Right.
So like that is an important point to make.
I'd love to hear other people's perspectives too. Like how did some of our listeners approach it, and did they make any decisions differently from us?
Yeah, and did we miss any points, right? So I think we're going to wrap this up, but before we do, I think Andrew and I are both crushing on the same person right now. Should we talk about that briefly?
Absolutely.
I mean, for you, it's your man crush. For
I have
me,
a full
it's still
man
a man
crush.
crush. It's still a man. Is it still a man crush when it's my
Yes.
crush? Because he is a man. Or is it a woman? Is the man part that you're a man, that he's a man, or that you're a man? Anyways, Andrew's got a man crush on Morgan Housel. I also have a man crush on Morgan Housel. For
those who don't know Morgan is the author of The Psychology of Money. I highly recommend it.
That's a book.
It's
really
book.
good. We'll put it in the show notes.
Great book. J.L. Collins's Simple Path to Wealth was my number one. And I think Morgan Housel's Psychology of Money is now on par with The Simple Path to Wealth.
What if you could only pick one?
I can't.
Who's a bigger man crush?
Don't make me do it. I can't do
Okay.
it. Both of them are fantastic. Morgan started a podcast, and his episode on respect and admiration is possibly the best 11 minutes of financial content I've ever listened to. It's so worth it.
It's really good. It'll give you what you need to pay your mortgage off, to quit spending money on other things. And either, look, I don't care if you pay your mortgage off or invest. It'll give you the motivation to do better things with your financial resources and care less about what other people think, which is one of the hardest, most psychological aspects of getting better with your finances. We should do a whole episode on just Morgan Housel, or just the concept of respect.
Or we could do hey, everyone, go listen to the 11 minutes of respect and admiration, and then you and I will pick it apart of why it is so fantastic and why every single word that he says in that episode is gold.
I just listened to last night, so it's very top of mind for me. And I was actually trying to describe it to Greg on a walk today, and I was about to play it. And he was like, well, you've already heard it. Just text it to me. And I was like, no, I want to hear it again, Greg. And I said, it's the sort of thing where I want to replay it for myself every week. Because I just need that. I'm pretty decent at some of these things and fairly disciplined with my money, but I need that reminder on a regular basis. And many do. And I will allow Morgan Housel to be that, whispering in my ear once a week, reminding me, where I need to get my respect and admiration from and why. And I'm not gonna give too much information, but it's 11 minutes, which I think you all could spare to give. We'll put a link in the show notes to it.
I actually debated in my staff meeting today, stopping my staff meeting for 11 minutes just to play it for my team.
You should play it. That's the kind of stuff I would do at work. That's the kind of stuff I miss at work. I would proselytize things like that I really felt strongly about. And again, I'm not doing it on, like religious beliefs or political beliefs or things that, people should make up for themselves, which you could argue they should also make up their own mind on this kind of stuff. But this to me was more innocuous of like thinking about what you're going to think about on your deathbed and in your obituary and other things. Because he starts with that, right?
Yes.
Doesn't he start with you?
Yeah.
I will say, when you mentioned that, I listened to like 10 Morgan Housel podcasts in the last 24 hours. They're all really short. They're all like 10 to 20 minutes. And they're just like quick and to the point. On
Maybe
that
we
note,
should take a page out of that.
I was going to say, on that note, we should wrap this up, Andrew. Okay, thank you guys for listening. We know your time is valuable. We appreciate you spending some of it with us. Like we said, if you have any thoughts about your mortgage and what to do, or you have questions you want to send us, we're always happy to listen to them. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you want to give us a written review on Apple Podcasts, or you can leave us a rating on Spotify. We truly appreciate it.
We also encourage you to share this episode with a friend or family member to encourage ongoing discussions about money. You can also subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have thoughts or questions, we'd love to hear from you, and you can leave a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370 or hit us up on Instagram.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Maggie.
Bye.
Bye.
We're going